So sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So, hey, Internet Land. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Clifton. I'm the founder of PocketLab, and we are here in the PocketLab offices in San Jose, and we're joined by our friend Darlene Cavalier, the founder of SciStarter, joining us from Philadelphia, right, Darlene?
That's right.
And so I'm going to give everybody a little bit background on Darlene, introduce her, and then we wanted to discuss citizen science in general. What is the role of citizen science in academia and research in our society? And then Darlene is the founder of this awesome resource called SciStarter, and we wanted to ask her a few questions about SciStarter. And then if you have any questions from the audience, just type them into the chat window, and we'll ask Darlene about it towards the end of the live stream. So, Darlene, thanks for being with us. She is a professor at Arizona State University's Center for Engagement and Training as part of the School for the Future of Innovation in Society. It's a long title. And she is the founder of SciStarter, a network of citizen sciences projects. She is also the founder of Science Cheerleader, which we'll get some background on that, and the co-founder of eCast, the expert and citizen assessment of science and technology. So, Darlene, thanks for being with us. And I guess the first question we want to start out with, just to give everybody a baseline of understanding, is what is citizen science? And does it mean the same thing to everybody, or do you have like a particular way that you define citizen science?
I think it's a pretty complicated question.
Okay.
And are you getting feedback too?
I'm okay now.
Oh, great. Okay, so the way that I define citizen science is the exact reason why I got involved in it. It was a way for somebody without a formal science degree to actually engage in science.
Okay.
And so that could mean just pursuing a hobby that leads to some advancement of an area of research. That may mean making some of the tools and the instruments that make that research possible.
Okay.
That may mean participating in public deliberations to inform science policy.
Okay.
So I knew that there was a way that I should be able to enter the field of science without having a formal science degree.
Right.
And I knew this from all my years at Discover magazine. So Discover is geared at a general audience. This means that we're not looking for people who have science degrees to read the magazine. And yet we're constantly beating this drum that science is all around you and it's accessible to you. We know that it's relevant, but this part about it being accessible felt a little disingenuous to me.
Okay.
It's really not all that accessible if you don't have a degree in science,
right.
Or you're not an educator or a policymaker, and so forth.
Okay.
Times have changed, in the past decade or so, that we've all been working to advance citizen science and other forms of public engagement in science. Things have definitely changed. And I would say that for the better. So many opportunities to engage, fairly simple to find those opportunities now. This is what we aim to do at SciStarter.
Okay.
Take all the great tools that you're developing, all the amazing projects that are out there, and make it easier for people to find those on-ramps.
Okay. What's like a classic example of a citizen science experiment or project?
Yeah, there's so many now. It's so diverse. We know people are usually most familiar with Zooniverse and some of the online transcription projects.
Okay.
People are also pretty familiar with some of the ornithology projects. So a lot are lumped into ecology and environment as well. And if it sounds like I'm speaking slowly, it's because I do have feedback.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yes, but it's just my own voice. It's not your.
Okay.
It's just tripping me up.
Yeah.
But now we know this spectrum is so broad. The
Okay.
types of opportunities that exist now span all fields. So we have more micro projects. In fact, I played a small role as a co-author of a paper that was just released yesterday or published yesterday. And that looked at the microbes that live on the International Space Station. That was part of a citizen science project that worked with over 4,000 people who did a very simple task of just swabbing their cell phone or their shoe or surface area in a built environment. And so that's my dog flower. And they sent those microbes to Argonne National Lab. They were sequenced. They were all added to something called the Earth Microbiome Map. That was one part of the citizen science project. 48 of those samples were selected to fly on the International Space Station, where they were compared for their growth rate analysis. So how are they growing in the near zero microgravity environment on the International Space Station compared to here on Earth? There's a second part of that research project. And then the third was to actually look at the microbes that are living in the International Space Station. And for that, we had the astronauts play a role here. They actually swabbed the inside of the space station. And then what they do is they put everything together in a payload. The payload is dropped into the ocean, in essence, and then others go out and they fetch the microbes. So I guess the point is, who would know that there was a citizen science opportunity for people to be involved in both collecting that data and then possibly even having their sample flown to the International Space Station?
Yeah, that's fantastic. How do these projects start? Is it a particular researcher that has an idea, or is it from sort of is it from the scientists, from the citizens, or where do you find the genesis of these projects?
Oh, they can start anywhere. It could be a concerned community member who isn't sure what's going on with the quality of their local water, who organizes the citizen science project. It's more likely to be a scientist who lacks data and starts a citizen science project because they need to get at the data that he or she is not able to get at alone. Or it could be a scientist who has too much data. And then they put it out to the crowds to help analyze and classify the data.
Is there a difference between, I know another common term is crowdsourcing. Is that part of citizen science, or is that something different, or are those two related?
Yeah, they're really related. And sometimes one project can cross over between the more classic type of citizen science, which is usually defined as the act of gathering and sharing data, over towards crowdsourcing, which is usually defined as the act of classifying data that already exists. So usually you have citizen science where there's not enough data, and you have crowdsourcing where there's an abundance of data. And in both cases, it requires the help of the public to advance research.
And then what, from your involvement with citizen science, what impacts or changes have you seen citizen science have on, I don't know, technology or policy or society? What is the effect that you've seen in your career from citizen science?
Well, my colleague, Karen Cooper, she's at NC State University, has done a really tremendous job of really highlighting the outcomes and the successes of citizen science, because people always want to hear about that. They want to know, what difference have the public made? So she went through, along with her colleagues, to start to dig up the sources of data used in research and peer-reviewed journals, and noticed that very rarely do the authors cite the term citizen science. So she did go through, and she has great examples of outcomes. A lot of what we know about climate change is because of citizen scientists. There's a fun stat in there that we know that there are 50 type of bacteria in your belly button because of citizen scientists who are working with NC State researchers there. I mean, Zooniverse has published a number of papers, and they give credit to the citizen scientists who are part of making discoveries through their platforms. And this doesn't even get into the health and medical field, where we can see people like Dana Lewis, who is now part of Arizona State University, who helped create a community that developed something called an open artificial pancreas.
Okay.
So, and she didn't have a science degree when she got started in that.
Oh, really?
She was a patient with diabetes and needed a solution for her lifestyle.
Okay. Well, so I wanted to ask sort of a few more specific questions now about SciStarter. And so what is SciStarter, and then how did you come to create SciStarter?
SciStarter is a place to find and join projects, and for those who are interested, also track your contributions to projects, no matter where you're doing that project. And SciStarter came to be because I was looking for ways to get involved in science. And it's not intuitive to Google citizen science.
Okay.
It may be a little bit more popular of a term now, but it certainly wasn't, 10 years ago when I started SciStarter.
Okay.
SciStarter was an outgrowth of my graduate work at Penn, where I was studying the role of somebody without a science degree to engage in science. So I started putting together this little database of opportunities that I found, tagged them public, so people could find those opportunities, but also so people could add opportunities. And it outgrew my little blog and became SciStarter, and now has hovering around 2,000 projects that are there, largely registered by scientists.
Okay. What's a good example of a project that you could be involved in through SciStarter?
Oh my gosh, put me on the spot. Let's see. We're coming out with our Christmas special too.
And you don't just have to say PocketLab projects, because we do have a few projects on there.
Actually, I would like to ask you about how you came to develop PocketLab.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll let you finish your question, and then I can follow that up.
Okay. So we have a number of projects. Simple ones like Stream Selfie. This is one that's popular with the Girl Scouts.
Okay.
Where you go outside, you take a selfie of yourself next to a stream, and the interface allows you to identify whether or not you see that stream on a map already. If you don't, you add it to that map. You answer a couple of questions about the quality of that stream. Is there a lot of trash? Is it public? Was it a safe passage to get there? And you are helping to populate the first phase of water quality monitoring, identifying the streams. The next step is to then invite those Girl Scouts and all those participants to be the delegates and the caretakers of that stream. That's awesome. And yeah, really simple, fun ones that allow for a lot of movement and deeper, foster deeper forms of engagement. Okay. These projects, we love those. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know. There's so many. If I get started, you're not going to stop me. Yeah, yeah. Well, to answer your question, I came to develop PocketLab with a similar mission that science can be stuck in the lab sometimes and doesn't seem very approachable to many people, and that I don't think that's the way it should be. I think kids and students are really good at asking really interesting questions that they would love to go out and find out about, like, why are there earthquakes, and where does lightning come from, and how does a car work? And there's no end to these really interesting questions that students and people want to ask, but they don't have a way to really explore them. And so that was the initial motivation behind PocketLab, is if you could give them this like Swiss Army knife kind of tool where you could go out and explore the world and collect data, what kind of questions would you ask and then go discover, and like unlock people's curiosity in science so that you can experience the joy of science, which I think a lot of people that get into science, they do it because there's a love and joy for it, and it's not just for nerds. I think that joy is, like, a lot of people can experience that if they had a way to do it and
and approachable and easy through easy access. So that was the original motivation behind PocketLab.
And tell me, what's the difference between this version and your last one?
So PocketLab Air is now focused on environmental science. So our first two products were focused on physics and engineering and being able to do experiments like putting PocketLab onto a rocket and measuring the altitude and the acceleration of the rocket, or putting it on a helmet and like crashing the helmet and seeing how the helmet performed. So very much around movement, physics, engineering. And then when we were thinking about a next product, we wanted to tap into some of the other big questions that are out there, the big science questions around things like climate change and air quality. And we have, certainly scientists have sophisticated tools to go and measure and do experiments around climate change and air quality. But how can we involve individual citizen scientists in that research, and how can we give them a tool to go explore that? So PocketLab Air is for the mission of understanding air quality and emissions and pollution and climate change in your own environment. So to measure ozone, particulate matter, carbon dioxide, and weather conditions, you can start to get at some of those questions that surround those big problems, those big topic areas.
So if a project owner registers their project on SciStarter and we see that they're measuring some of those things with air quality, what kind of questions should they be asking you to know? Like, is this an appropriate tool for them to use for their project?
Yeah, so the quality of sensor data varies, and so you have to find the right types of questions to go after with either a low-cost device like PocketLab Air, which will enable you to do different things than like a regulatory monitoring station that the EPA runs. So you can, with PocketLab Air, it's portable and it's low cost, so you can do things like look at how does the air quality and the emissions change in like a pickup and drop-off zone in your school, or you could see how carbon dioxide concentration changes when you're near a roadway, or then you go into a park or along a trail. So those start to get at some of the questions, and being able to have a network of users. So for the EPA stations, they're very high quality, but in the San Francisco Bay Area, I think we have 10 of them to cover 5 million people. So you don't have the geographic density of information that you would like to have to understand these questions. So if you can give people low-cost devices that are portable, you can start to fill in those gaps in between all those the EPA stations, and then you're contributing towards like our broad knowledge of the air quality in the San Francisco Bay Area.
And I see a note here that somebody cannot hear me.
Fine, actually.
Yeah, you're coming in okay. But Kay Holweg, can you hear us now? But so I guess to all the viewers out there, if you have questions, please put them into the chat window, and we can discuss those. But we have a list of a few more, and then we'll start to wrap up in about 10 minutes. So I guess you talked a little bit about how you started SciStarter, and we also mentioned Science Cheerleader before, and I think that might be, so I wanted to ask so diversity in science and participation in science, what do you think is the state of sort of the diversity of participation in science, and how through things like Science Cheerleader, if you want to touch on that, have you been able to find paths and ways to get more people, more diverse populations involved in citizen science?
Sure. So Science Cheerleader is an organization of current and former NFL, NBA, and college cheerleaders who are pursuing STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math. And that is more of a play on stereotypes, which I find to be very useful in terms of how people think about scientists in general, let alone female scientists. But the fact that scientists might also be happy people with other types of interests and friends and all these things that we usually don't equate with scientists is why Science Cheerleader, the organization, came to be. And it was a play off my own background as somebody who cheered all through high school and college and even pro, right here in Philadelphia for the NBA 76ers. And just, I guess, just reminding people that it is true that science is for everyone. It is sometimes challenging still to find those opportunities, but if you have an interest and you're curious, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if you have a formal degree or not, or any degree whatsoever. If you're willing to jump in and kind of answer the call when needed, then we need to create easier ways for people to find those opportunities, get involved in those opportunities, and also continue through that spectrum of opportunities to engage more deeply that I was talking about earlier. So this kind of brings up a interesting point with citizen science of there's a level where it's fun. So maybe you're just giving your microbes or swabbing microbes and turning it in. But without feedback from the project owners, without updates of how the data is being used and keeping that participant engaged in the research project, it does cross a line, I think, of just sort of using people. So it's one of the things that I'm becoming more clear about. A lot of what we do at SciStarter is to look at the barriers that exist right now. One of the reasons I'm happy about your tool is because we do find that if somebody comes to a project and they're excited about it, but they don't understand the instrument that needs to be used, they just don't even bother with that project.
Right.
And on the other side, if the scientist putting together the project is unaware of low-cost versions, products that have better user interface, they're missing an opportunity to have more people involved in their project as well. Yeah. Anyway, back to Science Cheerleaders. There's more than 300 Science Cheerleaders now. They volunteer their time. They go out and they talk mostly to young cheerleaders about careers in STEM. They remind them that they can and should continue being cheerleader for as long as they'd like. They remind them that unlike the drawings that many middle schoolers made of scientists, which shows a man in a team doing a project, a woman almost always by herself, and she's described as sad and lonely. But that's just not the case for the Science Cheerleaders in particular. Yeah. So they really just try to encourage them. They also remind them that it's okay if they don't grow up to be scientists, but there are many, many ways for them to engage in science and to stay engaged in science. That's a message for their parents as well. And then they get them involved in those projects through SciStarter. Okay.
Well, that's great. Do you see changes for the diversity or the perception of science? Have you seen changes in that since you've been in this field?
Well, I have seen non-scientists taking their role further and further, where it's not just collecting and sharing data. I mean, we see in the maker movement in particular, where they are coming out with tools that are actually being distributed and used by citizen science projects, which is huge. And then we also see more people involved in these public participations, where they're having a voice, a direct voice in federal science policy, which is unique and exciting.
All right. Well, I have two more questions that I want to ask, and then we'll I think close up our session. But you mentioned Maker and this Maker movement. We have these tools like Raspberry Pi and Arduino and all these prototyping platforms. And how have you seen sort of the Maker movement intersect with citizen science, and how do they relate?
So I think Dave was at our Citizen Science Maker Summit at Arizona State University, because that was one of the questions we wanted to examine. Do they intersect? What more can be done to help them intersect a little bit more? So one of the things that became pretty clear is that you had people developing really cool things, and there's a maker to manufacturing group there. So there's a segment that has identified that they know how to move their creation to some level of manufacturing. And I want to say it's under 300, I'm sorry, somewhere around between 300 and 1,000 units, which defines them as like being, okay, you can manufacture this. We saw, I think, a real knowledge gap among the scientists as to the low-cost instruments that exist out there.
Right.
So what we started to put together was a database of tools and instruments that can be used for citizen science. And it's still very much in beta. But you could see the beginning of it if you go to SciStarter.com/tools. Okay. And you'll see there's probably 200 or so low-cost tools that are in there.
Okay.
So we did that in part so that people who are looking at a project and see that there's a required instrument would be able to learn more about that instrument without putting that burden on the scientists to do.
Okay.
So one, to make these things more discoverable to multiple audiences. Two, to make them more accessible.
Okay.
And yet we still see this this gap that exists. You mentioned the Arduino.
Right.
That's not easy for many people to use still. Not a typical person who's reading Discover magazine sees a great opportunity to get involved in something. And if they know they themselves have to assemble or build the instrument, that's probably a barrier to them to get involved. Yeah. So it's one of the other things I really like about PocketLab is that you definitely took into account the user experience and the user interface and the reality of this is a favor that people are doing to get involved in the citizen science project. So the easier we can make it for them and the more enjoyable we can make it for them, the better.
Yeah, well, thank you.
A couple of questions.
So we have one audience question about
one here. If you wonder, this has been here since the beginning.
Okay, so first audience question is: do you have recommendations for citizen science programs for K-12 students to get involved in? And this educators is in Richmond, Virginia. So I don't know if there's any regional ones or if there's national ones that you would recommend.
There are at least 3 resources for you. One is on SciStarter. There is an educators page. So one way that you can find these projects is you can look based on location. So you can type in Richmond, Virginia, and you can see the projects that come up. And then you can narrow your search and look for projects that are appropriate for certain grade levels. You can search for projects that have lesson plans as well. There's a whole bunch of ways you can get down to the best project for your students. There are also 2 other partners that we work with. And one is North Carolina State University. And they have something called Students Discover. And you'll see where they filled out or created a host of lesson plans for projects that don't have lesson plans. So they align projects to next generation science standards. We actually post all of those lesson plans to the project page on SciStarter as well. So that's a nice search there. And then the third is UC Davis. They have a citizen science center where they kind of create, I guess, points or tips for educators looking for projects based on the type of learning outcome or the experience that you're looking for your classroom to have.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I wanted to ask one last question.
There's one here.
Oh, so there is another Q&A question. This is for, I guess, directed at us for PocketLab Air. So analyzing particulate matter and then taking it to a lab. I guess that could be a long answer, but in short, yeah, you can analyze the data after you've collected it, and you can take it, you can export it from the PocketLab app, and you can do take that to different places. I don't know if the question about taking it to a lab, you mean like a regulatory lab or what exactly? So I guess we'd follow up on what is this for, like research purposes or for education purposes, or you're trying to regulate emissions. I guess maybe the answer would be different. So I wanted to close with a question for Darlene. So holidays coming up, Christmas time, Hanukkah, New Year's. Are there any holiday citizen science projects? Any way to do citizen science over the Christmas break, winter break? Anything going on in that area?
Yes, and if you sign up for our newsletter, you will get our 12 Days of Christmas newsletter, which is coming up. Yeah,
next appropriate.
Week. And it will have 12 projects you can do over the holidays.
Yeah. So, any ways to like detect if Santa has intruded your chimney or?
Not that I'm aware of, but I haven't checked the database in a while.
Yeah, the aerodynamics of reindeer.
Yeah.
Things along that line. Okay, well, so for everybody out there, SciStarter is a terrific resource for you to be involved in citizen science, both as an active participant, active citizen, and if you're a scientist or researcher, to recruit people to your project. So we really encourage you to check it out. They've been a great partner for PocketLab. And Darlene, thank you so much for joining us and answering questions.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Good luck with the campaign.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye.